March 15th, 2026 edition of Pastor Jim Preaches. We will be looking at the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, verses 19 through 31.
Now, I will confess that when it comes to my musical tastes, my preferences tend to side more with the secular than the sacred. You're much more likely to hear Electric Light Orchestra, the Moody Blues, playing in my car, as opposed to Chris Tomlin or Mercy Me. And so I am always curious and fascinated when families dip into the secular realm for funeral music. My first memorial service in Dodgeville, all the music was from the band Def Leppard. That would not have been my first choice. But I will confess, actually I won't confess it, I'll admit it, I love it. I have been moved to hear Elvis's rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water during a funeral service, in which, although not overtly stated in the lyrics, there are definitely some Christian-centric themes in that piece. I have a soft spot for the Rainbow Connection as well. But the one song that I have heard far too many times in funerals is Frank Sinatra's My Way. Oh. Okay. The words for this were actually written by Paul Anka. It actually comes from a French song that I'm not going to try to pronounce. Not a good choice for funeral music, especially because it is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. It speaks to our intent to do things the way we want them to be done. Not good, but yet so very popular. It's indicative of our culture of, you got this, do it your way, no one's the boss of you. But yet somehow we think we can be disciples of Jesus, but live into the expectations of the culture around us. Not possible. And I hope that you've seen a trend during the two parables that we've explored, or I'd explored with you so far in Lent. One, the kingdom of God is not like the kingdom of this world. And two, to be a part of the kingdom of God, you have to be dressed right. Not the right clothes, but the right lifestyle. So with that, we turn to this parable of the rich man and Lazarus, found in the Gospel of Luke, and not likely to be on anyone's top list of parables. But Luke's gospel, of the four, is described as the gospel to the poor. Why is that? Doesn't take us long to establish that. It's in Luke's gospel that we hear the Magnificat, Mary's song, in which she sings, "He has brought down the powerful from their thrones, lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty." When Jesus begins his public ministry and reads from the prophet Isaiah at the synagogue service, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." And in the Sermon on the Plain in the Luke's Gospel, Jesus says, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." Good news for the poor. Though they may have experienced want and suffering and struggle in this world, they will experience after this life the opposite. So this morning's parable is a steep contrast of rich and poor. On the one hand, we have the rich man dressed in purple. Purple was considered the color of royalty. The more purple you wore, the more status you had. I'm guessing that he had plenty of purple to wear. We know that he ate luxuriously every day, lived in a gated community sectioned off from the rest. That gate could be locked at night so that he and the other rich folks wouldn't have to deal with the poor and the needy in the nights. Interestingly enough, in Christian tradition, the unnamed rich man was given the named dives, Latin for rich. But we compare that with Lazarus, the only person in any of Jesus' parables to actually have a name. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but that might be the only significant thing about Lazarus. Someone lays him each day at the gate of the rich man's house. He lays there each day, hoping that the rich man or anybody might give him some of the scraps that fall from their tables. These scraps might be what the rich man would give to his dogs. These might be the very same dogs that are licking Lazarus' sores each day. Now, we should keep in mind that dogs during this time weren't necessarily kept as pets. They were kept as protection. Not always the nicest around people. Yet these dogs would come over, lick his wounds. Might actually help him, the healing process, to some degree. But these were his only friends. In fact, when Lazarus died, there's no mention of him being buried. Didn't have a lot going for him. The contrast between the rich man, Lazarus, couldn't be more clear. Lazarus dies, no funeral, isn't buried. But now he finds himself in the presence of Abraham. In the Jewish tradition, to be in the presence of Abraham was one of the highest honors that you might receive. It was a position of glory. And the rich man finds himself in Hades, in the place of death. And he discovers this huge chasm between them, insurmountable. The rich man who lived the high life now finds himself in torment, and the man who lived a life in torment now finds himself in glory in the presence of Abraham. Good news for the poor. But what of the rich man? Concerned about his current position and his current condition, he makes a curious request. He asks for Lazarus to come over and cool his tongue with water. First is, the rich man calls Lazarus by name. This is significant. Because if he knows Lazarus' name, he knows who he is, he's familiar with him, who he is, and what his condition was. This means that he knew Lazarus' condition and chose to do nothing. This was not just a case of ignorance. He chose to do nothing. And the second thing is that even in the afterlife, the rich man is making requests of Lazarus to serve him. Even in death and torment, he assumes that Lazarus would be there to serve his needs. And Abraham has no interest in changing the rich man's condition. So resigned to his condition not changing, he thinks of his brothers. Well, maybe I can get them to change their ways so they don't experience the fate that I'm experiencing. I could just warn them. So he again asks that Lazarus would go back and warn his brothers. And Abraham says, look, dude, if they've already ignored Moses, if they've already ignored the prophets, they've already offered these teachings. Moses says in Deuteronomy 15:7, if there are any among you in need, a member of your community in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, don't be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. Oh boy. In Isaiah 58:6 and 7, it says, Is not this the fast that I chose to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, let the oppressed go free, break every yoke, share your bread with the hungry? Oh boy. Bring the homeless poor into your house, and when you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kid. Boy, well, the message was already pretty clear. If the brothers aren't going to listen to that, they're certainly not going to be convinced if someone rises from the dead. The call for Jewish people to help the poor has been there for ages. If the brothers have ignored all that, nothing is likely to convince them. Think about the characters in Luke's gospel. Shepherds looked down upon in society. A widow, low on the social totem pole. The prodigal son, someone who squandered his father's inheritance. And now Lazarus, a crippled and sickly man. All of these characters find redemption and celebration at the end of the story, and Jesus seems to weave in a theme that those that society often looks down upon will be lifted up. And if Jesus, who rose from the dead, can't convince us of the need to recognize and help the poor, we might be in trouble. So where does this light leave us? Probably feeling a little bit uneasy. In Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, he writes, "Justice too long delayed is justice denied." Now, he wrote these words in response to fellow clergy who were telling him to have more patience in the struggle for civil rights for African Americans. They told him the struggle's going to take time. You need to be patient. He couldn't understand that. So when the call for justice seemed so clear, how could he wait? He wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere." And it's amazing to me in an age when we are so exposed to the news in so many different forms, whether it's the newspaper, television, radio, internet, social media, whatever, that in an age in which everything is so visible to us, whereby poverty and injustice is so clear to us, we can become increasingly numb to the call to help. It's easy to dismiss those who need help halfway around the world. But how do we respond to the injustices that are right on our doorstep? How do we respond to the Lazarus who is waiting at our gates? Now, I shared my feelings about my way for a funeral service. But I have thought about a secular song that I think really fits the message for today. And that's actually a song by Pink Floyd written in 1987 called "On the Tourney Away." The writers actually state that the song speaks to society's reaction to the poverty in the world, and our response is often to turn away from it. We know what's going on, but we grow hearts of stone when we think about what we might be able to do. I mean, the news makes it quite apparent that we live in a broken world. It can be difficult to think about where we might even begin to make a difference, to even begin to address the problems around us that exist. And I think the Christian response to worldwide poverty is to simply start where the difference can be made most directly. As the parable tells us, we should look for the people that are in need right outside our own gates. J. Penny Nixon, in reflecting on this parable, writes, "To most of us, however, steeped in a consumer society and up and on the wrong side of the chasm, this parable is one of the hardest to hear if we really hear." Even in our own times of struggle, we're probably more like the rich man than we might ever be like Lazarus. Now, I don't know if I'm ready to call the rich man an evil person. You might be able to convince me that he's a bad person, but what I see most of all is that he is someone who saw and failed to act, to acknowledge what was around him in need while he continued to live in luxury. And I don't necessarily believe Jesus is teaching solely a lesson of condemnation. I think he's teaching us a lesson about seeing. Teaching us a lesson about seeing those who are in need around us, to lift up those who are lowly, to reverse the fortunes of those around us who are struggling. Called to simply look out from our gate to see the needs around us. We're now approaching our fourth meeting of a book study in which 12 of us are exploring the book Toxic Charity. The book does not condemn charity as a whole. If anything, it invites us, it emphasizes the importance of helping others. But the author, Robert Lumpton, emphasizes that the help that we do provide must be to help bring people out of poverty and make them more whole, not to perpetuate their need for assistance and help. I mean, Jesus' parable, if it's not clear already, we are called on and commanded to help the poor around us. We can't ignore them. And to do so, we do it at our own peril. And this is more than just money. It's about getting out into our community and being in ministry with those who are poor. Acknowledge, help, share Jesus with them, with the poor, not for the poor. And it's up to us as members of this church family to determine how we as disciples of Jesus Christ want to live out Christ's clear call in this parable.